And you're all set.
Okay, I call this the November 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Personnel Board, the Town of Southborough to order. First order of business is approval of the minutes. Minutes were circulated in advance. Any changes or corrections to the minutes?
Just one thing, I think we need to add the slides under documents down at the bottom. They are referenced as an attachment in the section where I was presenting, but I don't think it was in the original packet.
Okay. Any other changes? Okay, with that amendment, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Make the motion to approve the minutes for the November 2nd meeting.
Is there a second?
Hang on, it's for the 10-12 meeting, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
I'm
for
sorry,
10-12, correct.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
There's no one, there's no one on,
No.
okay.
The minutes are approved. Okay, we are here to discuss the report of the Collins Center on the compensation study. Just a few comments before I turn it over to Mary. All SAP employees were advised that the report was available on Personnel Board's website and that we would be discussing it at today's meeting, and we have a fair number of employees here, so I'm glad to see that. I would ask if you have questions, please hold them to the end of the meeting, and I promise we'll get to them. We have two major tasks that we have to do. One is to decide the amount of the annual increase, which will be informed by the report. And the second is to make whatever changes we think should be made to the SAP, particularly the Schedule A and Schedule C. The report, I think, makes our job harder than I thought it might be, but it is what it is. And we have a lot of questions we'll have to deal with in terms of how we would implement it if we were to adopt the recommendations. There are, by the way, copies of the report at the front desk if anyone needs one, so please feel free to grab it. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary. First of all, thank you for the Collins Center and all the work that was put into this. We appreciate it. Obviously, we've all read the report. I'm sure we all have a number of questions, but why don't you quickly run through sort of the highlights in your mind and potential issues that we have to deal with.
All right, I'll go through it briefly. Thank you so much for having me being here today, and I apologize I went to town hall. A little embarrassing, but I'm sorry. I want to thank actually Melanie and David Colton, who was on my team. They did the bulk of the work together on this in terms of interviewing the staff. And so we're happy to go through this. What I'll do is I'll probably just walk through the sections of the report so people know what I'm referring to and make a few highlighted comments and then answer really any questions. The one thing I want to say is the actual report is only 11 pages. So I see in the packet there are extra documents. They are the backup data for what we did. And you'll notice some of the charts look a little different because they're reformatted for the report. I just wanted to make sure that it didn't appear that these were part of the report. These are, quite frankly, I would make them look nicer if I thought they were going to be part, but the data is in there and that's what informs the charts in the report. So it's certainly all public information, but it's not actually part of the report, it's supplemental. So what we were asked to do, it's important to go back to what were we asked to do. You had a comprehensive study done a few years ago, and it has served you well. There have been some changes in jobs, and the Personnel Board and the town has been very good about addressing changes in jobs in the meantime. So I know that you have used your own system to look at things, but what you haven't done in recent years, and I want to say the survey for the report you had last time would have been FY15 data maybe. So
Yeah.
that's quite a way away to not have salaries looked at. So I think really that's the driving issue of what are your pay rates, and you don't truly you have interesting pay ranges. So I think what I'll do is I'll just go through the report and then answer any questions. So what we do is we show you your current structure. We always start at the beginning. We were asked to take a look at the compensation rates across the board. They have two pay schedules, and entertain any edits to job descriptions. So the way that we did that is we afforded people the opportunity to fill out a job description review worksheet, which many people did. We have made recommendations based on those questionnaires to many of the job descriptions. Those are under separate cover. And we are recommending a few changes in classification, both based on the questionnaires and the interviews. Everybody who wanted an interview, who filled out a questionnaire, had an interview. So that was good. And that affords us the opportunity to get into a little bit more detail. And then what we did is we did the market survey and took a look at that and said, okay, there's two places for adjustment. One is that the jobs were reviewed and the responsibilities, the scope, and the complexity led us to believe they should have a change in classification or grouping. The other way is your market survey to show, okay, with what did the market survey show, and should we make an adjustment? Because it's a classification and compensation system. You can't look at one without the other. So both things come to play. So I'm sure those are going to be where the questions are, the why this or the why not that. So you look at on page 2, it shows you 2 and 3, it shows you your current structure. We talk about how we did the position review worksheet and what that entailed. Some employees felt that it was better, which is not what we wanted, but we made it work, that they referred to other titles and said, that's what I do, versus telling us why their job description should be tweaked or changed. What we were able to do, though, is in the interview, speak with people about that and get the same information. We do have in here, it talks about the administrative position descriptions. You have a system that was put in place years ago of your business administrator series. You have very generic position descriptions. While that's good for cross-training and looking at classification, it's not preferable when you're dealing with what are the true essential functions of a position. We really want position descriptions to be specific enough so that we can say that department, that title in that department has these functions. So what we're recommending is that you use the core of those position descriptions are fine. We do recommend that for nuances for each department, you add a paragraph or an addendum to that position description so that you're picking out specific key duties that may not be in another department. So they're a little too generic in terms of the essential functions, especially when you may have an issue under the Americans with Disabilities Act of can you perform the essential functions of the job? So we want to be sure that they're customized enough to address that essential function issue, but general enough so that you have the same core competencies when you're looking to fill a job. So we do recommend that addendum. We did a market salary survey. We did use municipalities that the personnel committee said that they have used in the past. So we didn't just do the abutting municipalities. We used the municipalities for the survey that was recommended to us by this body. So, and when you can see there, the ones that were listed, we got a very strong response. 12 responses is a pretty good response these days for a survey. And we feel confident that the data we have is accurate. There's always nuances though. And we tried to tease some of that out. You happen to have a finance director who's a treasurer collector. In many municipalities, that position is not the finance director. So you have to weed through some of the data to coalesce that when you're making a recommendation. In many municipalities, the town accountant is the finance director. Sometimes they're standalone. So without doing expansive data research into, hours and hours to call and get that data, we're able to coalesce that. And we have good backup data from the municipalities where they put in their responses to our survey. So that's one factor. We make an effort to compare apples to apples across municipalities. Some positions are easier to compare. A building inspector or a building commissioner, for example, is fairly standard because it's very strict statutes across municipalities. Town clerks, whether they're elected or not, have the same statutory responsibilities across municipalities. Where it can be a little challenging is in the administrative positions. I will tell you, business administrator is not a common industry title in Massachusetts. So having the ranks of business administrator, 1, 2, and 3, or 2, 3, and no number after it is not as common. But the duties are common when we're able to compare. So what we are able to compare when we do a survey is if there are titles. The more common titles are administrative assistant, department assistant, administrative clerk. But we're able to figure that out when we look at the survey data. We're able to say that position is at that level. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, but we are quite frankly used to that. In terms of your compensation, a large issue that we talk about on the bottom of page 4 and on the top of page 5 is that you have inconsistent pay ranges across your structure. That is inherently unfair. Why would one person take more years to get to maximum than another? There's certainly different pay rates by grade, but to have a townwide system have different ranges is not a best practice. It's not a recommendation that we would sustain. You have different pay schedules, and we understand why that happens. You have an A group, a B group. Sometimes it's union, sometimes it's non-union, sometimes it's part-time, it's benefited. So we understand that. But if you have a title of administrative assistant in one schedule at one pay rate and a title of administrative assistant in another schedule with another pay rate, that's inherently unequal. So we are recommending that you adjust your schedules to absorb the C schedule into the A schedule and standardize the percentage. Now, what we were able to show, the largest percentage group is your A8 level, which ironically is your primarily department heads. When you see in the survey, their minimum pay is well below the market in many places. That's an indication, but your maximum pay is pretty close to the market, not that bad. What that tells us is your scale is too big and you've either added onto it or it's morphed over time. A 42% pay range is very large, as is in your C group, the 50% pay range. So the fact that you go from 30 to actually 27 to 50%, an employee's tenure should be an employee's tenure and having different pay scales. Now, if you have a union agreement, that's a different ballgame. But if you're looking at your pay scales, why 30% is the industry standard, and that's what we are recommending. And so when you see our recommended pay ranges, what we have done is we never want to look at the minimum pay of the market to set the ranges. We look at the maximum pay and work from there. So what we did was look at the market survey, we coalesced that with your current structure, and we recommended 30% ranges. So when you look at the recommended classification structure, which starts on page 5 and goes into page 6, what we did is we absorbed the C structure into the A structure based on the existing ranges for those titles and looking at the market. The tricky one in that is, quite frankly, the C5 grouping. The market shows one thing, the current structure shows another. So I would actually say the board may want to look at that one and opine on where the best place is for those positions. It's a little tricky. The way the current incumbents are being paid might fall into one group over what we recommended. But the salary survey data for those two positions don't align either. So I think that's really a decision point I would ask you to take under advisement and take a look at it. So when we look at coalescing the existing pay, the existing range, and the ranges we recommend. So whether that's, where we think that should fall, that's on the line, and that's a judgment call. And the board may want to make a recommendation on that. So what we have done is we have some recommendations. You can see on the bottom of page 5, most of them at the beginning are the just moving the C into the A schedule. And we do line up the administrative positions. So then we see, so you can see on the top of page 6, that moving the 2 C5 positions to A6, it could go either way. It could be an A7. I think you need to evaluate what titles are in the A7 and say, are those similarly situated? One issue that we did encounter in some of the work is that we don't have the full rating system you use. So we have our system, but so many of your positions seem to be grouped appropriately. Made no sense for us to apply our system to every single job. Your system seems very intact and there's just a few tweaks. So I wouldn't undo that. So then we get into the changes, which most people in the room are interested in. It's the middle of page 6, where we talk about what positions should be changed. We are making a recommendation that your finance assistant department heads be moved to the A6 level. Not only is that because of the review of the position descriptions and responsibilities, but even more so because of the market. Even if you take out some of the outliers, these positions are well under the market. And they're all statutory positions. So when you look at those assistant department heads, they all have statutory authority. So, and it is your structure is very unusual across municipalities. And if you look at the survey data of the backup data, you will see those positions are similarly situated across most municipalities. So it is rare. Sometimes we have seen a difference in an assistant when there's an elected official. The theory is maybe the elected official isn't a full-time employee and the assistant is really running the office, that sort of thing. So, but our analysis of the current structure and how people operate is that those 4 positions should be in the same classification, and the salary data indicates they should be in the A6 level. The assistant town clerk salary survey is a little bit lower than the finance position. So that data is a little bit less per hour, but we believe having the internal equity is much more important than the outlier salary data. So we're recommending that those positions be moved to the A6 level. The other recommendation is a change in the public works business administrator. These positions that are the key administrative in your larger departments are complex with different payrolls, different procedures that go on, different complexity. So we do recommend a change in the public works. You can see that. We recommend a change in the fire department administrative assistant. Those duties align more with the business administrator. And in the police department, we are recommending that the dispatcher go from the C group to an A group, but that not only is aligning the pay, it is moving that pay up based on the salary survey and the complexity of a dispatcher position. We had, on the youth commission, we wanted to put it back to the personnel board to maybe take a closer look. A lot of the information we received seemed to be more structural than my job description is wrong. It felt like we're trying to restructure the department in an organizational way, which really isn't the role of our position. You can then use some of the salary data that might be in there. We did collect some salary data for those positions, so that will be useful for you. But restructuring functions from administrative to technical is not what we're looking at. So it's a job description review, not an organizational review. So then, as we say on the bottom of page 6, we talk about how we came up with the salary schedule. We looked at the survey data, we look at the current rates and ranges, and then we use the maximum survey data along with your current ranges to come up with a recommended range for those groupings. First, we do the groupings, then we look at the salary. You have to remember the salary data in the survey. We call it market, we don't tend to use the word comparable, where, it's what's out there and it's a snapshot in time. It is flawed to find one salary in a grade. We look at all those that are defined by you and us as, for example, A8. I'll use the one we're talking about. There's all those different market salary data points. We coalesce and take a look at what is the norm, what is the average, and what is your current rate. Somebody their salary data may be under what you're paying as a maximum, but the key is that your structure is those people should have the same pay range. So it's really important to not cherry pick or look at one versus the other. So that's where some of this becomes an art, not a science. Anybody can say, well, we're going to take the average and the outliers of all of this salary data. That's not how you come up with the ranges. So it is a judgment call. So these are the recommended ranges. They have 30%. What we would suggest, and we are happy to have these conversations with you, most organizations move to a step system that typically ends up being more, it's certainly easier to budget for. It can be more equitable when you have a system where there's no moving people through ranges in a way that's consistent. The reason some of your positions are behind the market is that you've only given across the board increases and you've not been able to keep up a little bit. And certainly I have anecdotal data that you haven't been able to hire at the minimum for many positions. So that is, we have also taken that into account when we're giving the recommended salary ranges. The decisions you'll need to make moving forward are, how are we going to implement this? Do we apply it across the board? Do we give a minimum and then implement? Those are some conversations we can have. But at this point, I will just briefly say on the surveys, you can see the negative numbers means a negative number doesn't mean the person is underpaid. It means that their rate is under the salary data. So obviously though, when you see all those red parentheses, that's an indicator. When we do a survey, you might have a handful of these. So the fact that there is significant negative numbers, particularly on the minimum, is that your minimum pays are too low. So because you can see the difference when you go to the maximum pay, there's considerably fewer that are under. So that tells us that your ranges are just off. Some are well above your middle, but that's because when you go back to the 30% ranges that you have, those are in better shape. So that's a quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mary. You and I have had extensive discussion, so I'm going to hold off and defer to my colleagues to see who has questions. I have many, but
I do too, so I don't know if you,
I have a meeting at noon,
well,
just telling you,
we have to
okay?
be done by 10:30. So why don't you start?
okay.
And I'm happy to come back to do more questions.
So, thank you for the summary. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not. I guess I'm gonna start with some soft, easier questions, and I'm gonna work my way to harder, and some may be commentary in nature as well, so just bear with me. So if we did move to a step system, this is the easiest question you're gonna get. Is coming up with that step system under our current contract, or are we looking at additional out of scope sort of?
With
work?
us?
Yeah,
Oh, no, we do that.
okay,
Oh, yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. Happy to
So-
record.
So I think you're gonna see where I'm going with this. I'm just gonna put it out there. I believe as of today, I would vote to direct Colin Center to start working on a step system. And I think the main reason for that conclusion is we've been giving, we hire, right? And it candidly pretty arbitrary, as long as someone's not above the midpoint. It's very arbitrary to the appointing authority and candidly to our personnel director, right? That has some say and ability to weigh in that we have created this incredibly unequitable situation, right? We saw it in the vacation and accrual data as well, is people are being hired based on the advocacy of their appointing authority or can't, right, like, or, you know, certain credentials. And I think certain credentials should outweigh it, right? If you're hiring someone from another municipality that has coming like lateral, same position, bringing 10 years experience, of course, they should be, you know, on the, I'll call it the far right side on the higher end. But if they're new to the role, coming in that outside experience, whether it be municipal or not, doesn't necessarily replicate, then of course they should be on the left side. So I do think we need to find a way to develop a step system, and that's a this year thing. Like, I'm not going to town meeting with this SAP. Again, regardless of what we do with employee handbook or not, I know it's a ton of work. It's gonna be a huge financial impact too, and I'm not agnostic to that, but we have to get this right. Because I think it goes to retention and recruitment, right? The two words we've talked about ad nauseum on other topics on personnel board, at least as long as I've been on it. So,
Let me just interrupt you there just to say the reference to step system is in there because Mark and I asked for it because we both felt that we needed to go in that direction. But obviously, we also didn't have, without the imprimatur of the board, the authority to say that's what we want. So that's part of what we're here to talk about, is to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what we want to do.
all right, awesome.
Easy one.
All right, yeah,
Yeah.
so that was my commentary. So now I'm gonna get, a few more specific questions. Reference 2015, the last time this was done, right? We know what our SAP says in terms of quadrennial sort of review. But it seems like nothing has changed in municipalities that's causing this shift that we're so out of balance, right? I think, and I know I don't want to throw someone else you may compete against under the bus, but it seems like our system wasn't fit for purpose potentially back in 2015. Is that a fair statement, or am I reaching too far?
I think you're reaching too far. I think what didn't happen is and I don't know where the decision points are, and certainly the competitor is a very dear friend of mine, so that's no problem. We have no issue there. There were clearly decisions made to not have a step system. And that typically when that happens is we're going to do adjustments. Maybe some are going to have merit. We don't know, and I'm not going to opine on that. However, what also didn't happen is I don't know how you move people through their ranges. And if you were,
It seems
so
like.
that's
That's the
your
problem.
decision point, because that's where the inequity has come in.
Yeah.
So when we talk about an implementation system of moving people through, we would recommend whether you use step systems or quadrants, like if you've been here more than this many years, you've got to be at least at the, those are policy decisions. I think the structure, I've seen the report, perfectly reasonable. You know, I think it was what the living, breathing life after the report is where there might have been a disconnect. And if in fact, at the time, the ranges adopted were in that moment generous, you wouldn't think necessarily to say, oh, how are we going to increase it? So I think there's probably a few things.
Well, and I think there's another reason too, and it's on us. And that is the data that we look at, from, you don't use the term, but we'll say comparable towns, where when we see 2%, 2%, 2%, 2.5%, we're only seeing a part of the picture.
Right.
And we're looking at that saying, boy, we're at 3%. We're doing better than everyone else, when in reality, we're falling farther and farther behind.
Because they have a step.
Exactly. So I think the system that was put in place was right when it was put in place in terms of the numbers. But over time, because of how we've analyzed the data, we've fallen behind. It's our decisions we've made that have caused that, not a flaw. It's just my view of not a flaw in the information we were given.
Correct.
And the other thing is we've treated adjustments to the salary schedule on a sort of ad hoc basis. Some years we don't do anything with it. Some years we bump it. So it's really, I take responsibility. It's decisions this board has made that I think has led to the problem.
Jason, we did have steps, you do know that, right?
Yeah.
I do, well, yeah, and I think it's very clear when you look at any union contract, forget it, doesn't matter what the union is, right? That's always in our data package, right? And you see them going steps 1 to 7, it doesn't matter what union they are, the number's bigger than 2, unless they've gotten something else, right? And I think that's, I mean, it's very clear,
And the board went, before any of you guys went, it worked great, and then they were trying to introduce merit and a step, a merit and a cost of living, and it got real blurry at that point.
yeah, my view, and I can be convinced otherwise, is in the step system, right? There should be recognition for years of experience in tenure with this municipality, and you should know predictability where you're going to get to up to a certain point. Some people may max out day 1, right? They maybe should be at the max because they've been in the role 25 years and served the community well. And so be it, then when we rehire that position, when the person moves along, obviously there may be a reset there, but also we also know that we'll have this quadrennial review that we need to stick to make sure that that top end of the range is the right number. All right, so here's a few questions. On the job descriptions, you referenced people had the option to tweak, and you specifically called it youth and family, that you thought it was more than a tweak. I think the personnel board, and then we may have a policy on this, Barry can keep me honest, likes to actually vote on those job descriptions if it falls within ours. Like, how do we differentiate? Like, when I see people moving 2 grades in particular is like my red flag. Like, did someone tweak something in the job description, or was the job description just never fit for purpose? Like, how are we going to, from a process perspective, understand what that department head said? Again, I go to some people just better advocating than others. Like, right, and I just want to make sure that those that had a really good advocate, or really kind of maybe we're putting things in the job description that we as taxpayers never signed up for, right? Like, for example, we may have some very strong individuals doing the department head's job, and naturally things from that department head's job description have slipped down into assistant, or we'll call it someone doing the work.
Mhm.
And I just want to make sure that we have balanced that, right? That we're not paying top end of the range for a department head that maybe is under contract even potentially, and that's now slipped down into someone else's role. And because I think it goes beyond the personnel board, I think we have a job to advise, right? In particular, select board, advisory, and any other appointing authority. Like that something may be more of a restructuring, right? And something may have shifted. In most cases, it's probably fine. It probably meant we didn't go out and hire another FTE because that person that's in the assistant role was stepping up to the plate. But I think there just needs to be a clear delineation because, as much as I'd like to think everyone is performing, meet or exceeding standards, right? Like there's natural differences in performance. So how are we going to capture those changes so that we can just do a smell test, in particular on the ones that are jumping 2 grades?
So if you're ever looking for a job in this, the Collins Center is always hiring. You're hitting on the key points of all of this, and we're really good at those nuances, okay? So you're talking about 2 or 3 of the factors we look at. You have, and it's a real challenge because what happens is we hire good people and then they're good. So we give them more duties outside of their job description because we're going to use them for the talents they have. And then what happens is the job creeps, right? That's a management problem, quite frankly, not a job description problem. And I think that, and then you have industries change. We're seeing youth and family services changing everywhere. Northborough, changing their whole department, okay? Health and Human Service departments are being created. This type of work is morphing. Police departments are hiring clinicians. It's a little bit deeper dive in what do you, for that structure, we're saying you need to do a little deeper dive rather than just looking at a job description and adding duties, because they may or may not be doing those when we look at a classification review, we're not creating new job descriptions for future. We're reviewing what are they doing now. Some of the comments we received in some of the other job descriptions were, well, I'd like to try to grow this position. We didn't opine on that. That's not what we were asked to do. Now, the issue of jumping 2 grades, and I know which positions you're talking about, I could argue that, maybe a few go up and 1 come down, but looking at your current structure, especially at that level, at that assistant level, the pay rates are very close together. Those are the smaller ranges. So when you say, oh, you're going up a grade from a 7 to an 8 is huge at the maximum, but not from a 4 to a 6. It's not significantly different. And that rate will fall in those ranges. I also believe, and we did get anecdotal data that, and I was able, the town administrator was able to share a little bit of information on the rating systems of some of those positions, not the whole rating systems. In our humble opinion, the evaluation of the complexity of the statutory financial positions, it is unique that they are all lower than. So I think that's a flaw in your system right now.
I'm actually not questioning the
Yeah.
financial ones. I'm an accountant by trade, actually.
Okay, so you
I
should-
get it, and
yeah.
I've seen in municipalities in particular.
So
how
the
hard
other
that-
ones that have the changes are the factors that you look at when you have an administrative position that is the sole administrator. And when you look across most municipalities, and if you look at some of the data, you will see the big few are police, fire, DPW. They have more complex organizations. They have more staff. There's more payroll complexities, those sorts of things. Some of them do contract work, some of them don't. So those are the ones that you see are that can be moved quite frequently. I think that, and you'll see, and I don't know who's sitting behind me, so I apologize if I'm talking about an individual's position. But again, we look at the duties, not the people. So the fire administrative assistant was woefully misclassified before. And then looking at the duties and the nuances as compared to the others, not quite at the level according to our evaluation of the police and DPW, but certainly meritorious of an adjustment, at least to the business administrator too. So those are some of the nuances that you look at. Because at that level, your pay rates are such, it's really about the internal comparison. So, and it's really hard not to make it be about the person. And that's why you hire somebody else so that it's not about the person, it's about the role and the responsibilities and the duties, which goes back to the flaw in your position descriptions that were so generic. Because those things are true. When you read those generic job descriptions, anybody could fit into anybody's, almost, and it becomes one of the unique nature of those positions. So that's one of the challenges.
So for those positions that we're reclassifying, we need to go and the position descriptions need to be revised
Yes.
so that they justify, because we're moving some of them because the market data tells us these people should be at this level. That's where they are everywhere else, but here, there, here, we have to move them up. But we obviously have to have consistency between the job description and the compensation, because going forward, if we add a position, we have to use your tool going forward, and it's going to tell us where it falls. So that's something we have to take on, is making sure that these position descriptions are all updated to reflect apparently what their true responsibilities are or should be.
Yes, and don't ever say yes, but yes, and we looked at that. The education and experience requirements are very similar, even in the ones that are in 3 different grades. So in one case, the town administrator was able to show, and this, we actually disagree with the weight of the points of supervision in your existing structure, extremely heavy. And the analysis of who is a manager, who is a supervisor, who is a work leader. So those points are significantly different than the way we would apply them. But you're right in that they will need to be tweaked to comport with the system. The education and experience, quite frankly, are not different across some of those positions. And quite frankly, if you're changing them in general, the issue of 2 years of college is not something we recommend. So it's, and then the way that they say 2 years of college and this many years, or a degree, or this many years of high school, it's about the competencies. And so that might be something we want to, discuss moving forward. We don't typically see that language. You've gotten away. Now I know why it says that, because it used to say associate's degree, and people don't have associate's degrees as often as they used to, particularly in the administrative series of positions. So, and if the question is, if you have 3 years of experience and not 2 years of college, can you do the job? So we need to go back to what is really required. And as you say, people know what phrases to put on something to cause it to be another point factor. So we're all getting really good at that too.
And I'll get back to you, Jason, but I want to give John
My background is all in fire administration. So, what's the difference between the job description for the fire department administrative assistant versus the police department administrative assistant? Now, in the police department, I know that they do the payroll, the bills, a whole bunch of other stuff. But why is the fire department less, when I would be led to believe that she's probably doing all those things? I don't think the chief's doing it. It could be, but
Sure. So I don't have the actual revision of the data. I can get that for you. I did not do those interviews. There was a determination that it's not as complex. So we can take a look at that, and I can get that to you. A determination was made that it was not as complex. And that goes also to, although it doesn't really impact us, that would be a 3-grade jump. It's significantly, and it might be, I don't know how long the person has been in the job. Why was it an administrative assistant before? Why is it now? The analysis of the positions were done that it was in fact not at the same level as the police. And I can get you that information. I don't have it in front of me today.
The only, as far as administration, the only difference I could really see would be confidentiality. In the police department versus the fire department. That might come into play more. But I will say this, in the past, I think the positions have been, you hit on it about personnel was getting involved or whatnot, but they were in one case severely underestimated. I didn't see in here, and I don't know what's, I'm not up to date on what's going on here in town, but I didn't see the public works director in here.
People have contracts.
There's a contract, right?
Not in here.
You made me nervous. I thought I missed a position.
But it is an existing SAP with an asterisk, if I remember correctly. So are we proposing to take it out?
That's up to you.
Well, we deal with this all the time with the contract positions because they can go in, can change from year to year, and we've done different things with them. So we can either put them all in or
Was it reviewed as part of this?
no.
Okay. So we're assuming that the DPW superintendent process that's underway now, that person can elect a contract.
Yes.
If they don't, then we're on notice that this probably needs to be revisited.
Did or can or would changing these Cs to As and whatnot, any estimate as to what the cost of that will be?
Actually, it depends on what you do with the step system. I didn't have everybody's current rates of pay, but if you were just putting them in the ranges, they're going to fit within that range. So putting people in the ranges isn't what's going to cost you. It's if you put them on a step and you come up with whatever, and we can work together, and I can give you some recommendations on what other municipalities do. Where do you place somebody on a step, and what factors do you use to consider what puts them on a step? Most systems start from the first instance of place them on the step that gives them an increase. Now, some will say, well, that's not fair. I'm getting a 1 cent increase and I'm getting a $2 increase. Some municipalities say, well, we're going to roll this into our across the board increase. So we're going to guarantee everybody 3%. And then we're going to place them on the scale that gives them an increase. But that 3% was going to be your cost anyways if you did nothing. So that's where it goes back to what is your policy decision of what you're going to recommend. What the factor in the cost will be how big your steps are. If you have a 3% step, which we certainly don't recommend, because you will then adjust by a cost of living or an across the board plus a step. The industry, our recommendations of late has been 2% steps, so that then you have people, then you can apply a cost of living or an across the board, and everybody gets at least something. Because if you have larger steps and a COLA, and then you've got people at max, they're getting nothing, so those are the decision points you're going to have to take. But implementing, if you were just doing ranges and not steps, you'd just be right. Unless somebody's below the minimum that we're recommending, it wouldn't cost you anything. But the point is, how are you going to move forward and implementing it? So we recommend, and I will recommend when we talk about this, that you come up with what your across the board would be for FY24. you know, let's just say we're implementing this for FY '24, and you're gonna say, based on the market, based on this survey, you're seeing where people are, we want people to be adjusted by 3%. I think that would be a good litmus test. That would be a good percentage. Then you place them on the scale that guarantees them at least 3%. Some people might get close to 5 if they've just missed that step, but most will be in the 3 to 4% range if you did that.
What does your, what would your step system look like? So many years, like,
If we have a 30% step, you could have 15 steps. You could do 2 1/4 and have 12% to 12 steps. So it really does depend on what you want that step increment to be. What we have seen recently is 15% steps. Some organizations use that as tied to merit, that you could give somebody more steps with merit. Those are all policy decisions that you all have to make. So it really is our conversation of what we want to do.
what's the norm in other communities?
The norm that we have seen is 2% steps with 15 steps.
15 steps?
So one of the challenges that we have is, I believe there are about 40% of our employees are below these recommended minimums
Okay.
now. So, and this is what you were talking about, if you go to a step system, I guess it's easier in a sense to deal with that because you're just plugging them in to the step. But how do you deal with those people vis-a-vis the whatever percentage increase we should then grant across the board? So are we bring them up to the minimum and then giving them an increase?
No. If I was not clear, you come up with what your across the board would have been, whether you were doing this or not. So you say, we're giving everybody 3%. So if you apply that 3% to what they're making now, you've probably gained that gap with that minimum.
Yeah, I ran some numbers and you could use some pretty big percentages and there's still going to be a sizable number of people below the minimum. So that's what concerns me, how we treat those people fairly, but to the extent you bring them up, you impact the people who were sort of at that level. You've closed that gap. So from an equity perspective.
Well, I think that the policy decisions you need to make are, you're never going to gain back the 7 years of inequity if it exists. It's just, we need to move forward. You don't, if somebody gets a larger increase, and the issue is somebody who's going to be at step 1 has been here, 5 years, and somebody else is going to be at step 1 who's been here 1 year, that becomes your issue. Some municipalities place people at steps based on, not on years of service. If you've been here 10 years, it doesn't mean you go to step 10. But some will say, if you've been here more than 20 years, you're going to be in the top 75% of the range. And you apply some sort of formula to that. For those who are under the recommended ranges, sometimes there has to be a cost factor and you do it over a few years. We've had some municipalities say, we're going to have an implementation step that guarantees somebody who's been considerably under the recommended range, and there's a 5% differential for that. I think that becomes the implementation conversation. And particularly because your pay ranges have been so disjointed of the different percentages, I can see why some are underneath the market. You may need to do a transition year. This is what we're finding in terms of the market. You may not be able to sustain that in a fair way. So when we look at where would people fall, how does that look? How does that work? We have had 2 different towns say, we'll roll this in for the next year. So maybe you do a 5% adjustment for those who are considerably under, or you put this off for another year and give you time to work within this. So I think you really need to get into the weeds a little bit to come up with, so long as you create the policy on that and apply that policy across the board. That's what I think the key is. And if in fact, the town, this is why you get the big bucks of being elected officials or appointed officials. You've also got to get this supported and move forward too financially. So that's why we can work with you. If you look at the pay scales and you look at the implementation numbers and you say, this is going to be a big hit. Maybe you, for the first few years, expand it to a 35% range and then do catch up after that. And as you move people forward. So there's certainly policy decisions that we can back into. Certainly, if we made it a 40% range, people would be most likely in that range. So maybe we take a look at that. And when you look at the numbers of the market, so much of what we recommended was tied to your current pay too. So we can take a little bit more deeper dive into some of the analysis. And if the board says, we just can't yet swing the 30% range because we've cropped off the bottom of so many, maybe we do 35 for this year. And then when we do, it's because depending on the budgeting and the big hit in the budgeting, if you can't fund it, it's no good to have a policy anyways, so I think we can look at some of those issues.
You,
Is John done?
I would support you, Jason, in looking to see what step system looks like.
Okay, so
But I certainly wouldn't be interested in a 15-step. I would think of
unions are approximately 7 in this town, from what I understand.
What is their step increase?
Every contract's just been done in the last 3 months. So,
But they're probably 3 or 4% steps.
yeah, plus COLAs. In some instances, I mean. I
So
think we
there,
said we need
if you
one.
have a 7-step system at 3%, it's about 25% of a range.
Mhm.
So, and that gets expensive when you're trying, 3% steps gets
Oh, right,
expensive
okay.
when you're then trying to do the CPI. And it was great when it was 0 and 1s, and so it's that balancing act, we just did a project with the municipality who couldn't reconcile that. So they did not create a step system, but they created a quadrant system based on years. So again, those are harder to manage. They are harder to
A
manage,
quadrant or the step?
quadrants.
Okay, so I'm gonna move that the personnel board ask the chair to work with Collins Center to come back with a proposed step plan.
yeah, and I'm fine with that. It's unfortunate we don't have a full complement here. Obviously, no, I understand we're not making a decision and, we talked about moving forward and looking at that, so that's not an issue, and obviously we've got time, few months anyway, to figure out what we're gonna do on this piece, but yeah. I have no problem with that.
I second that.
Well, I don't think we need to take a vote. I'll just work with
I
them.
think we should, because I think you got employees in the room that need to see that we're taking this seriously. And I
Thank
think
you,
it
Jason.
sends.
Okay,
I
I think employees believe we're taking this seriously, that we're doing this, but okay. If you feel, we're missing 2 members here. These are big decisions. I don't think it's an issue that we want to move forward and get information on how we would implement a step system. I think we've talked about that all along. If you want to have a vote, we can have a vote on that, but these are big decisions ultimately we're making, and I'd like to have as much involvement of the whole board as
I
possible.
could give you a few samples for you to review.
So let me explain the
Yeah.
logic behind the motion, other than sending a message. We don't have months, we have probably maybe one and a half of, looking at Paul as a member of the finance team. We're gonna have to give some sort of guide of what this may, right, like some sort of placeholder, right, and get guidance back, more importantly, of that's great personnel board that you're trying to do this, but we, the town, can only, right, like, we, like was mentioned, town meeting ultimately is gonna have to say on this based on what is brought forward by the select board in advisory, but I think we have a job to do to act within those parameters. The reason we can't wait like 4 meetings to then decide to like move forward with this, at least investigating a step system. No one's saying we're going to a step system today. Is I heard 40% of our employees are below the minimum. I think, did I hear that right?
Yeah.
I would like to see that list, right? And I want to see how that then, if we just put those people at the first step in their current grade. So leave aside the first half hour discussion of these positions should move because of this job description or that description. Let's just talk about where people are at, right? They're guaranteed to have that grade next year at a minimum. Let's see what that's starting to look like and what the repercussions are of that. Then I think it helps us make educated decisions on, do we do 7 steps, 10 steps, 15 steps, right? Like all of that, because I think it will come together if we start to kind of see it. And unfortunately, I think we also need to see the data of, I don't know if Kristen can do this or if this already exists, like where these people are on the midpoint, right? Like I'm sure we could go pick in, right? Like, but where is everyone against our current midpoint, which I think is not fit for purpose based on what we're hearing. And then, that will probably help guide the 5 of us to policy decisions that we're being asked to make.
I don't have a problem. Again, it's just form for me, but if people feel they want to have a motion and vote, I don't have a problem. I think it's just doesn't change what we're going to do. But if people feel that they want to do something, I don't have a problem.
I think the motion was made and seconded.
Okay,
Yeah.
all in favor? Okay, I want to talk a minute, unless there are further questions.
I do.
Can we ask some questions as well?
Well, okay, we're not done with meeting, but we got a tight schedule here because I think we lose a quorum at 10:30.
Well, I can Zoom from the car.
Okay.
And we still use,
We'll get
still-
to,
'cause
we'll
we're
get to
hybrid meeting.
questions, but I'd like to have the board.
I some just very quick specific ones. We talked a lot about that fire administration, and we talked a lot about business administrator 1, 2, 3, and we talked about administrative assistant, right? I would like to, maybe not today, but like as a to-do, I would like to kind of see how we're lining up, like what are the similarities between a 1, a 2, and a 3? And what is an admin assistant, right? And you also use the words business coordinator is not common in municipalities.
Business administrator.
Administrator, sorry. But we have, like, we used, and then you also said something about, to John's questions about the fire, business administrator had different roles and responsibility than the police business administrator.
You don't have a fire business administrator, you have
We
an
will
administrator.
if this,
Yes, yes.
But but you're recommending moving that position in particular to equal to the police business. And you have it going to a
Business
6,
administrator too.
right, which is what our police one is.
This is a 6.
Police is a
No,
6,
your police one is a business administrator.
which is A6.
And the fire is being recommended to A5.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to
Get at those nuances.
the nuances
Yep.
of like what, like, right, and what is an
What are the
admin
differences?
assistant?
Yep.
And if you have recommendations for titles that we should be changing these to more
Okay,
holistically, I'd like to hear that. 2 other public safety related questions, just mainly because there's been a lot of talk about it in town. We are in the process, we just have a new police chief that was our lieutenant in the SAP. My guess is that position is going to be advertised and filled soon. When you looked at the lieutenant in particular, how did you factor in Quinville? Because we have a specific stipulation in our SAP related to Quinville, and the union contract actually, I believe, grandfathers Quinn bill even after it went away for those employees after. So I realize it's a very specific nuanced question, but realizing that there's an active recruitment there probably, I think it would be helpful to understand how you're factoring in Quinn bill based on the wording of our SAP.
So we did not receive any review sheet on police lieutenant. So the classification is what it is. And when you see the salary survey, if it's in there, it depends on what other pays are in that. I could double check the backup data on that.
So
We
can you-
didn't factor Quinn. We ask for base pay. So
Okay.
whether people answered that or not, we can look.
Okay, so can you meet with Chief Newell, who's now our permanent chief, who was the lieutenant? My guess is you didn't get an answer because he was filling both roles at the time, and it was probably been awkward to answer it. So I just think it's important that we understand that going into that. And I don't know if there'll be what the salary ranges are and who's in the range, like, because obviously we may have decisions to make this year on that.
I'm happy to follow up offline with that. We collected salary data on that title. And we were not asked to look at that classification
Why?
because anybody who wanted their job description reviewed filled out a questionnaire.
But we had
And I'm
we had
happy
a
to do
police
it.
chief on
Happy to
administrative
do it.
leave,
Happy to do it.
so.
Yes.
yeah.
How's that?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. My last question is on dispatcher. That one, similar to the public health nurse, you're moving from the part-time schedule, the COA public health nurse is moving into the Schedule A. You're moving them into a range that looks to be $8 to $9 different. How do you factor that in with, other municipalities that use it more as a per diem schedule for that position? Like how when the police chief, who usually makes the recommendation on that, how are they gonna factor in someone that's coming in to fill the same position? Like, is it gonna be based on experience or stuff? I've just seen it in more of a per diem schedule, not a part-time schedule, and we do have that option in our SAP, so I don't know if you had looked at that or not, or if there were any comparable towns that staff that same way.
We did not do a staffing study. I will double check to see if people answered in a way. However, work is classified by the duties being done, not the hours it's being done. So this was portrayed as a regular position, not a per diem position. And that's the salary data we tried to collect. Whether somebody is 5 hours a week or 50 hours a week, it's the same duties. So I'm not sure we deal with this all the time with call firefighters and.
Well, that's what I'm
full-time-
saying is,
yeah,
like,
Yeah,
They're not, my understanding, in the police chief, when you're talking about the lieutenant
I will
position,
follow up.
and maybe the fire chief may be helpful too, but my understanding is they are allowed to select they're not regularly scheduled, they pick up shifts as their schedule allows. I don't know what that population does for other full-time work, or if this is their only, but I just,
Your point is
Yeah.
if they're casual, is that the same rate of pay and is that what we surveyed
right,
for?
they obviously
I will
all
look
have to
at
do,
that.
there's one person in that dispatch center at a time, right? They
Mhm.
all have to be able to answer the phone and get whoever needs to be there
Mhm.
there. I just didn't know if that rose to a part-time schedule versus more of a per diem schedule. I'm done.
We collected
Thank you.
data as if it was a part-time schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just question on process. So we say to you, as we have said to you, we want you to develop the step system, show us what it would look like. And so you're going to give us back a grid that's going to have X number of steps in it to be determined. The devil then is in the details of plugging in individual people to where they go on that grid. And we can, I guess, then determine what the cost to the town of doing that step is. Then we have to determine, okay, some people are getting a 3% bump, some people are getting a 6% bump, whatever it works out to. So then we have to figure out okay, and I'm just talking out loud here. Do we then have to figure out, okay, on top of that, we're then gonna give an across the board increase? Or I suppose it's theoretically possible, we could say, well, we don't need to do one now because people have been brought to the level they should be. I'm struggling with that, if that makes
So
sense.
we will always, all day long, every day, recommend you guarantee a certain across the board increase. And that serves as your COLA. Everybody's at least gonna get that. Then you implement your system. You wouldn't implement it and then add that.
Okay, okay, I'll stop there. And that's something we do need to decide at our next meeting is what the percentage increase will be, but let me, I know a number of people had questions, unless anyone else on the board. John, you go.
We have to, as a board, talk about that lieutenant's position, because the wording in the SAP, the way it is now, says that position is guaranteed certain benefits under the that are under the SAP, but in fact, the lieutenant, the contractual employee, has been negotiating with the town administrator. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're not under
It's
contract, they're
not
in
in
the
an
SAP.
employment contract. There is an agreement with the Board of Selectmen about some benefits that are carried over.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as an employment
And,
contract.
you know, they haven't necessarily, it's up to the individual who takes the position.
Sure,
He can give up some, so there's an ambiguity there that the SAP gives them certain benefits, but in negotiating, whatever he's negotiating, sign, he could give them up.
Yeah.
That, to me, doesn't make any sense.
I don't know, it's a topic for today.
Yeah,
No.
all right, yes,
Mary, I got a quick question for you. Can you look at 4, 5, and 6, what we currently have?
Yeah.
4, 5, and 6, you said the ranges were kind of similar. You're looking at, Mary, look at 5 mostly. We have 3, 4, 5, 6 positions. You're looking at moving out 2. One of the things when this was originally done, and the management team didn't really have any input, didn't have any. Why wouldn't we do that in just 2 instead of 3? We just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you think we really need 3 different grades for those? You think there's that vast of differences in the position?
I think that's a fair question. I think that, and this is where I'm gonna sound, I feel terrible about that.
Ah, just
I'm
turn it
Mary,
on.
by the way. You're who?
Paul.
Oh, nice. The scope of this project, quite frankly, was not to evaluate your whole structure.
Yep.
It was to be a review, a job description review. In many times, the board may want to consider condensing, but then you would have to do you would need to re-rate all of the positions in those 2 groups. We see that often. I hear what you're saying is that you create a larger band. And we have not reviewed that. Have I seen that happen before? Yes, but only after each position has been the point factors. I can see in the 2015 report what the total points were for each of those positions, and there's a reason why they were put in different grades. So that's where the most important thing in a classification study is those points. Then you apply the salary. So I have to say, we didn't look at that. We weren't asked to look at that. If the board wants to pursue that on its own, or, you know, again,
Actually, let me reshape that. In other towns that you see, is that unusual to have it 3 or?
To have what? I'm missing your point,
Like
that you
staff,
have,
4, 5, and 6. He took those positions. I mean, is that typical to have 3? Or would you more see that in 2 different grades? Just in general. This is
are you
general,
talking all titles or administrative titles?
The administrative, just looking at
Oh.
between 4, 5, and 6.
Okay,
Just
so
very-
I missed
you
your
made a
point.
great point that they're very, very close in ranges and
Yeah.
pay. You know, you made some
Fine.
great, and I'm just wondering, is that something down the line that maybe we just want to go to? We had, when that originally came out, Mary, we had a lot of people, oh, yeah, he's a 4,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, he's a 6, how can they be 2 grades? It caused a lot of havoc. And I'm
It
just
depends on the
wondering-
size of the organization. Often we see administrative titles get condensed from 4 to 3. So that you have, let me use the traditional civil service titles. You have a head clerk, a principal clerk, and a clerk. You know, what happens over time is people have not liked the term clerk, people have not liked the term secretary, administrative assistant. Sometimes the model now, quite frankly, is administrative assistant, department assistant, and administrative clerk. That's the industry standard that's out there right now. So when you have the administrative assistant, they're typically the administrative assistants to the chief, to the board of selectmen. You have department assistants that are your general staff, customer service facing the public. We see that across the board in assessing and planning but that's not unlike your business administrator 1. So really what we're saying is it's on the fringe of, you know, you have I call it the silent, because the police one is silent, it's business administrator, and then it's 2 and 1, so it gets a little wacky. And so the administrative assistant at the C level is really the one that should not exist. Is that, you know, and I don't know whether that's what you're saying, we're merging that into the A schedule. So, but theoretically, even though there's a different rate of pay, that's the point. You've got administrative assistants on an A schedule and a C schedule with 2 different rates of pay. If that's what you're saying, I agree with you. You shouldn't have that. But you do have 3 levels of administrative
Right,
assistance.
That's what I was saying.
Okay.
Last thing you said.
Yeah, yes, there are 3 levels, not
Yeah.
4.
I have one quick question for Mary. Can you tell me, was this data, is it FY 22 or 23?
3,
23, okay.
Yeah.
That was my only question.
which will serve you well going forward. We purposefully waited for the
Yeah.
FY 23.
And then my question to the personnel board is, assuming you're gonna be working on the step system, do you plan on adopting the suggested minimum and maximum grade ranges before then? Or kind of all at once?
I would think we would do it all at once.
Okay. 'Cause my only concern is if you did adopt that schedule and then say there's, you know, department heads or whoever needs to get bumped into that, they're gonna go in at the minimum. But in the meantime, if you just don't have a step system, you're still gonna be hiring new hires at midpoint. So I just wanted to be sure that that wasn't gonna be a consideration.
Other questions?
I do. And this is backing up a bit, so I apologize. I did actually fill out pretty extensively one of the questionnaires, and I was not interviewed. I'm not sure how those, I think at the beginning you said that everyone who filled out a questionnaire was interviewed.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, did I?
I didn't say that.
Okay, my apologies then. So I would go back to comparing, how are the job descriptions compared between the pay grades and the pay schedule? For example, I'm at the library, so that's an A3, okay? How does the senior library assistant or library assistant position compare to a business admin 1 or 2 position? How are those responsibilities different? I don't have access to those job descriptions, but I would be curious how you classify the responsibilities. I'm not sure if I heard you use the point system, and how those compare, because our title is not the business admin, but I'd be curious to know how our responsibilities are similar or different.
I'll go back, and I can get back to the board on that. So, and again, I didn't hear who you are, so I don't know
I'm
what
sorry,
title
my name's
you're
Carol
in.
Logan. I work for the library.
And what title are you in
Right
currently?
now, I'm a senior library assistant.
Okay, so you're a senior library
When
assistant.
I filled out the questionnaire, it was just a library assistant, so I'd be curious about all of the positions over there. None of us are called admin.
Okay, and you're currently in the A2, or you were when we started this, the A2 level. The library assistant level, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And now you're at the A3 level as a senior library assistant, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and your question is what?
How does that job position compare to, or job description, compare to a business admin that's a A4, or even a business admin that's a A5?
So what that goes back to is the report of 2015, where there were point factors assigned to it. So we can take I have the totals. So,
Well, I think it goes, I'm sorry about what your name.
we were
is.
not asked to reclassify all titles. We were not,
Jason, so it kind of goes back to Jason's point a few minutes ago on how business admin 1 and business admin 2 and the A4, A5, all those different categories, how they relate to one another, and how the other gentleman's comment about the fire department and the police department and how those get recategorized to different, an A4 and an A5 for the police and the fire. It just kind of goes like comparing between departments, not just within the department, on how those.
sure. I mean, the theory of classification is you look at the job duties of each and they fall into the groupings. And the report that was done in 2015 established this classification structure based on a very valid, objective point factor system. I will check. I did not do, I don't want to speak for my colleague. And my comment was anybody who requested an interview was granted one. I will look back at the data, but the questionnaire that you're referring to was for the library assistant and you've since been moved, correct? Is that what you said? That you're now a senior library assistant?
Right,
And
the
the-
job description still,
I'm asking you what job you were in when you filled out the questionnaire.
library assistant.
Okay, I'll look back at the data. So that, right now, your separate point is, now you're saying, why is a senior library assistant not the same as a business admin 1, correct?
I
Is
guess
that your
it's-
question?
I guess my question is, how were the job descriptions compared when they had a different title to something that's in another grade?
Can I just maybe answer this? Well, and it goes back to what Mary was saying. So in 2014, it was, 2015, the consultant we had then looked at the job descriptions and graded them all based on a scale that consultant had. So if something came, a business administrator 2 on their point scale was a 5, and a senior library assistant on their scale was a 3. If there have been changes since then to cause, then the department has to come to the personnel board with a revised job description, which would then be graded to see, is that still a 4? Should it be a 5? So it doesn't, nothing in the grading has changed. They looked at the grading that was done. We didn't task them with taking their scale and evaluating all the jobs on their scale. She just looked at, and I think rightfully so, unless the job descriptions had changed, their scale is going to produce something that looks very much like the scale we used before. It's not going to be that much
I
different.
guess that's my misunderstanding then. But then how did these other jobs warrant a change in? Because those job descriptions were looked at and found to not be appropriate. They were changed because it was found that they were appropriate at a different level.
And
Yeah, I'll just reiterate the process. So if people felt their job descriptions were wrong, they filled out a questionnaire. Using our evaluation tool and our knowledge, quite frankly, of classification, we can see whether edits warrant or change the point structure of any job. So was there a change in a job that was, had the job morphed in responsibility? Did that change the points that are assigned to move it to another grade? In absence of any change in job description, there is no change in the structure.
Thank you.
Barry, are the job descriptions in one location? Or can you go and
Yeah,
find
we
all
have
the?
access to those.
Vanessa,
Yeah, they're on the
Yeah.
shared drive. They're not in a public folder, but they can be moved to a public folder.
I would think they should be on the
Yeah.
personnel board's website.
I was just gonna ask
Yeah,
that.
they
Can
can
we
be
get
put there
those?
too.
We have all of them.
So that's something
Yes.
that we'd be able to access. Vanessa?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be great. If you guys could do that.
With the caution, it sounds like there's some updates that are needed.
yeah, and we've got to figure out a process because we can't put the cart before the horse. We can't be upgrading them until we've actually approved a revised job description. So there are a lot of steps that we have to go through here. John?
It's kind of a question and a comment, Barry. Is there gonna be a possibility that the town is going to actually examine taking where people currently lie within the existing scales and moving them over? So some of the 25th percentile, we move them to the 25th percentile. Some of the 30th, they go to the 30th. And my reason for asking this is I can only give my example, and I'm sure this has affected other people here as well. When I first started in my position some odd years ago, I came into mid-grade. Within months, they did a study. They had to give me, I believe it was $750 a year to give me the minimum. So now I'm almost back up to mid-grade. I really don't want to go back to minimum again. As we're looking at retirement, as we get older, we need to base our retirements on market fairness. And basically your new chart is what the market is paying. And say I stay another 10 years, someone 20 years in a position, if this happens again, and we don't do steps, I could be back at minimum. This is not equitable.
So if you heard me say, oftentimes there are policy decisions that need to be made on where do we place people? Do people with more years of service have to be at a certain percentage? An example is sometimes it is the reality, and this sounds extremely flippant, and at 58, I'm looking at the same thing. So, so please know that it has nothing to do with an individual. And oftentimes people need to leave jobs to make more money, and that's unfortunate. But that is also the market at play as well. So oftentimes we see that municipalities, and I said this earlier, based on years of service, they place them in the range. That's a policy and financial decision. And that's what I'm hearing you say, but somebody at max automatically doesn't need to be at max. If you had to recruit somebody in at max now, that doesn't mean they need to be at max on your new scale. So you need to step back and say, what is our process? And you need to decide your process before you start looking at who it impacts, because that's really, then you're backing into something. And we really want you to have an objective approach to it. And that's where it's really hard for people who are in the jobs I'm talking about in the abstract, because it is personal. It is our, it is our relative value. So that's why we're trying to say, come up with your system and we can help navigate that. And because it's very personal, these are hard, and you have a lot of positions where there's one person in it. So we can pretend and say, I'm talking about the HR director, or I'm talking about, the building inspector. Well, we're talking about Mary and Tom, so it gets tricky. But those are some of the policy things that, and then it becomes financial. I don't know how strong your finance committee is and what they're gonna do. So again, we have to,
It is difficult because when you do have the years of experience and they hire new people, and again, the market demands they hire them at a higher rate than you're making, and we're having to help them because they don't have the experience, and yet we're gonna go back down to minimum.
yeah,
That's troublesome. You would not see that in the private sector. This is something that it is personal to a lot of us.
Sure.
It's very personal.
and it's also happening, this happens demographically and recruitment wise. It's a real kick in the head of morale that somebody is being brought in close to what somebody who has been here for a long time. That really is just our market reality. However, the town is taking this step to try to address at least some of that. So it might, we'll have to see.
Question on steps, and I heard,
We have to be careful. We just.
oh, right. Okay,
Yeah, yeah. My transition was in 5 minutes.
I just have one question. I don't know what happened to Dorian. She repeatedly said.
Jason
She had
contacted her.
IT issues. She couldn't get a good Wi-Fi connection.
If anyone does log on Zoom, Michelle or her, can you let me know?
Yes.
I should have checked. There's no one.
No,
online. We're done with these core issues. Thank you all for coming.
Mary, thank you. Great job.
Take care. I could tell a joke. I'll tell you my dad's joke.
Okay.
He passed a few years ago at 89 and he jokes, jokes. So how did the butcher introduce his wife? Meet Patty.
That's a dad joke.
Yeah, it's such a dad joke. I wish he was here to tell it to me again, but. I was doing a training yesterday in Marlboro and, I gave on hiring practices, so I gave that joke. It went over well.
We need you for our quorum. So just on the steps, if you're gonna have a 30% spread and you do something less than 15 steps, then necessarily you're giving more than 2% a year. And it would concern me to sort of lock the town in to 3% or even more per year, forgetting about cost of living. So
What I'll do is come up with a few scenarios, and this is what we typically do. We've got the salary data, we've got the recommended ranges. It's 30%. If 2% steps doesn't make sense. Maybe we want to go to 2.25, 2.5. 2.5 would be fewer steps. Or we might want to increase the step, but expand the range to 35%, so that you maybe start lower, but you have a bigger step, so you catch up sooner. I'll run a few scenarios for you, and that's what, and then you've got something in front of you. And if we can get the existing page, we can plug that in. It's all the same spreadsheet. This is, so if we do that, and if we're gonna help you with that, we would need the hours per week, because because you have a lot of people who have different hours per week. So in order to use, and what your budget would be, 52.2, or, so if that's provided, we can run a few scenarios for you. And it's all tied to the spreadsheet in Link. You're only changing it, it's not a challenge to do. And then you get the fun of coming up with what is the policy impact on those things.
Okay, we have a ton of work to do in the next few meetings. Anything else? Okay, any other business? No other business. We've had public comment. I'm not going to worry about calendar. We've got a meeting scheduled for 2 weeks. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?